Black transfer student enters elite Korean academy. Becomes the Mafia Heir'S obsession in 72 hours. The first thing they said about Ava Brooks was that she didn't know where she was. The second thing they said was that she would learn. They were right about the first one. They were very, very wrong about the second. She arrived on a Monday morning in October, when the maple trees lining the entrance of Haewon Academy had turned the color of fire, and the air carried the particular crispness of a Korean autumn that doesn't apologize for being beautiful. She came through the main gates with a rolling suitcase, a portfolio case strapped to her back, box braids falling past her shoulders, and an expression on her face that her grandmother had spent 22 years perfecting in her. Unbothered. Not performing unbothered. Actually, genuinely, constitutionally unbothered. The kind that comes from a woman who has survived enough to know what actually deserves her energy and what doesn't. She had a campus map in one hand and a schedule in the other, and she was looking between them with her lips slightly pursed when the whispers started. She heard them. She always heard them. She had been hearing them since she was the only black girl in her AP art class in Atlanta. Since she was the only scholarship student at her summer intensive in New York. Since every room she'd ever walked into had paused to take note of her arrival before deciding what to do with her. She had stopped letting the pausing bother her somewhere around age 16. So she heard the whispers rolling through the courtyard. The pointing, the staring, the particular cruelty of wealthy teenagers encountering something outside their frame of reference. And she looked down at her map and found the arts building and started walking. What she didn't see, what she had no reason to look for, was the boy watching her from the second-floor window of the administration building. He had been in a meeting with the headmaster when the movement in the courtyard caught his eye. He had looked down the way you look at something peripheral, intending to look away. He didn't look away. He stood at that window for 45 seconds, which, for a boy who had never given 45 seconds of unrequested attention to anything in his life, was the equivalent of a different man falling to his knees. Then his phone rang, he answered it, and he walked out of the room. But something had already changed. Something small and irreversible, like the first crack in a wall that looks perfectly solid from the outside. His name was Adrian Seo, and he had just seen the girl who was going to ruin his entire, carefully constructed life. He just didn't know it yet. Haewon Academy was not a school for people like Ava. Let her be precise about that. Not because it embarrassed her, but because she believed in being precise about things. Haewon was a school for the children of chairmen and judges and old money families whose names appeared on buildings. The kind of school where the cafeteria had a dedicated sushi station and the art department had equipment that her previous school's entire budget couldn't have purchased. She had come on the Haewon International Arts Fellowship. Full merit, full scholarship, awarded to one student per year from the global diaspora arts community. Her oil paintings had done that. Her hands had done that. 10 years of discipline and her mother's belief and her grandmother's prayers had done that. Nobody had given her anything. She walked into her first class, contemporary art theory. 7 minutes late because the arts building had 2 wings and her map hadn't specified which one, and she pushed open the door into a room of 20 students who all turned to look at her simultaneously. She looked back. "Ava Brooks," she said to the instructor. "Transfer. Sorry I'm late. The map needs more detail." Someone in the back of the room made a sound that was almost a laugh. She found an empty seat near the window and sat down and opened her notebook, and it was only then that she noticed who was sitting 2 seats away from her. The room had a specific quality around him, like weather, like the air pressure was slightly different in his immediate vicinity. He was looking at the front of the room with the bored, total composure of someone for whom nothing has been surprising in a very long time. Leaning back in his chair, one hand resting on the desk, the architecture of his face so precise it almost didn't look real. He hadn't turned to look at her when she came in. Every single other person in the room had. She noticed that. She filed it away without deciding what it meant. Then the girl on her left, small, sharp-eyed, clearly the kind of person who had assigned herself the role of social secretary to the universe, leaned over and whispered, "Do you know who that is?" Ava glanced at the boy. "Should I?" The girl stared at her like she'd asked whether gravity was real. "That's Adrian Seo. His family owns half of Seoul. He's the..." She lowered her voice further. "His family has connections, like serious ones. Nobody talks to him unless he talks first." Ava looked at Adrian Seo. He was still looking at the front of the room. "Okay," she said, and she looked back at her notebook. The whispers found her by lunchtime. Who is she? The American scholarship girl. She's in the arts program. Did you see her braids? She sat near Adrian in theory. He didn't even look at her. Nobody looks at him first and he doesn't look at them. That's just how it works. She heard all of it. She carried her lunch tray to an empty table by the window that overlooked the courtyard, and she sat down and she ate, and she looked out at the October trees, and she thought about her mother, and she thought about her grandmother, and she felt, beneath the whispers and the newness and the particular loneliness of the first day, the solid ground of knowing exactly why she was here. She was here to paint. Everything else was noise. You're in the wrong section of the cafeteria. She looked up. A girl, beautiful, immaculate, the specific kind of put together that requires both money and practice, was standing at the end of her table with two friends flanking her like punctuation. Her name, Ava would learn later, was Jisoo Han, student council president, third-generation Haewon legacy, and, most relevantly, Adrian Seo's designated girlfriend by every social expectation this school had ever produced. There's a section? Ava said. Jisoo looked at her table, at her tray, at her braids, at all of her, with the slow, deliberate assessment of someone accustomed to having their appraisals matter. Scholarship students usually sit on the east side. Ava looked at the window, at the courtyard, at the October light. The view is better here, she said simply, and she picked up her fork. A beat of silence. Jisoo left. Her friends followed, whispering. Ava ate her lunch. She didn't see him, but across the cafeteria, half hidden behind a support column, Adrian Seo had watched the entire exchange. He had watched Jisoo approach. He had watched the new girl look up. He had watched her say whatever she'd said with that expression on her face. That completely, infuriatingly, inexplicably unbothered expression, and go back to her food. His jaw had tightened, not at Jisoo, at himself, at the strange, unidentifiable thing happening in his chest that he did not have a category for because nothing like it had ever happened before. He walked back to his table. He ate his lunch. He did not look at her again. He thought about her for the rest of the afternoon. She was in the studio at 9 p.m. when she heard the door open. She didn't turn around. Late studio sessions were common in the arts program. She'd already learned that about Haewon, that the artists kept strange hours, that the studio after 8 belonged to whoever needed it most. She was working on a piece she couldn't name yet. Dark background. A shape emerging from it, not fully formed, reaching for something just outside the frame. She'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, brush in hand, waiting for it to tell her what it needed. You're holding the brush wrong. She turned around. Adrian Seo was standing 6 feet away, still in his school uniform, looking at her canvas with his hands in his pockets and that expression. The controlled, evaluating, giving nothing away expression that she was already beginning to recognize as his default setting. She looked at her brush. I've been painting for 10 years. My brush is fine. Your grip is too tight. You're fighting the canvas instead of talking to it. She stared at him. Did you come to the studio at 9 p.m. to critique my technique? He looked at her then. Really looked for the first time. Not the peripheral, studied non-looking he'd done in class, but directly, fully, with those dark eyes that didn't give anything away except their complete attention. I come here every night, he said. You're in my space. The studio belongs to the arts program. I know. Pause. I'm in the arts program. She blinked. You paint. Something crossed his face. Sculpt. She looked around the studio and noticed, for the first time, the workstation in the far corner. The tools, the covered forms, the particular organized precision of a space that had been personalized over time. She looked back at him. Okay, she said, and she turned back to her canvas. She heard him cross the studio to his workstation. She heard the quiet sounds of someone beginning to work. And for the next 2 hours, they shared the studio in silence. The particular silence of two people working on separate things in the same space, which has its own warmth, its own texture, entirely different from being alone. At 11, she stepped back from her canvas and looked at it. The shape had found itself. It was a woman, she realized. Arms reaching upward. Not drowning, rising. It changed, he said. She turned. He was standing behind her, not close but close enough that she registered the shift in air. Looking at her canvas with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. Something open. Something unguarded. It does that, she said. I just show up and it tells me what it needs to be. He looked at the rising figure for a long moment. My instructor says I control too much, he said quietly. That I impose instead of listening. She glanced at him. Do you? A long pause. Yes. She looked back at the canvas. Then maybe you should try showing up and waiting. He was quiet. When she left the studio that night, she didn't look back. But she smiled. Once, facing forward, walking into the dark corridor. She didn't see him stand at the studio door and watch her go. The next morning, there was a coffee on her desk. Not from the cafeteria line. Not the paper-cupped, mass-produced kind. A proper cup, from the good cafe on the Academy's West End that Heir'S had pointed out to her on their way back from the studio. The one that opened at 7 before most students were awake. There was no note. Heir'S, who arrived at the studio desk 3 minutes after Ava, stared at the cup with enormous eyes. Where did that come from? I don't know. Does it have your order? Ava looked at the cup. Oat milk latte, light sugar, extra shot. Which was her order, which she had given once to the cafe counter yesterday morning, while reading her schedule, barely paying attention. Yes, she said slowly. Heir'S gripped her arm. Ava, someone paid attention to your coffee order. People pay attention to coffee orders. Not here they don't. Not like. Heir'S looked around the studio with the expression of someone connecting dots that were forming a picture too large for her frame. Ava, nobody gets coffee delivered to the studio unless. Heir'S. Unless it's from. Heir'S. Adrian Seo. The name landed in the studio like a stone dropped into still water. Ava looked at the coffee. She thought about the studio last night. The silence that had been warmer than silence had any right to be. The moment in front of her canvas when he'd said yes with the honesty of someone and used to saying it. It's just coffee, she said, but she drank every drop. She saw him in the courtyard at noon. He was with his usual group, the boys who moved around him with the gravitational deference she'd clocked on her first day, the ones who laughed a beat after he made any sound that could be construed as humor. Jisoo was there, standing at his shoulder with the practiced ease of a girl who had decided long ago that proximity was the same as belonging. He was looking at his phone. Ava walked through the courtyard on her way to the library. She didn't look at him. He looked up from his phone when she was 15 feet away. She felt it, that was the maddening part. She felt his gaze the way you feel a change in temperature, and she kept walking, her braids over her shoulder, her portfolio under her arm, her face doing the thing her grandmother had built into her bone structure. She heard Jisoo say something sharp and low. She kept walking. She was almost through the courtyard gate when she heard his voice. Calm, quiet, carrying in the specific way of someone who has never needed to raise it to be heard. Ms. Brooks. She stopped. She turned around slowly. The courtyard had gone quiet in the particular way that happens when everyone present understands that something is occurring. Adrian was looking at her from across the courtyard. His group was watching. Jisoo's face was a smooth, practiced mask over something that was not smooth at all. You left your notebook in the studio last night, he said. He held it up. Her sketchbook. She'd been looking for it that morning. She walked back across the courtyard. She was aware of every set of eyes. She kept her face completely, serenely neutral. She stopped in front of him and held out her hand. He placed the sketchbook in it. His fingers didn't touch hers. But the handoff was deliberate, slow, considered, the kind of careful that is louder than contact. Thank you, she said. Don't leave things behind, he said. His voice was low. For her, she understood not the courtyard. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked to the library. Behind her, she heard the courtyard stay quiet for a beat longer than it should have. Then, Jisoo's voice, Adrian. Not now. His voice, flat and final. Ava kept walking. Her heart was doing something wildly irresponsible. She told it to stop. It did not stop. The fight happened in the hallway outside the second-floor classrooms, and it happened because of her braids. She was walking to her afternoon seminar when she overheard it. 2 girls from the legacy program, voices carrying with the particular carelessness of people who have never had to worry about being overheard because the world has always arranged itself around their comfort. She's pretty, I suppose, if you're into that. The hair is so much. You'd think she'd make more of an effort. She's here on charity. The least she could do is, it's not charity. Her own voice surprised her with its steadiness. It's a merit fellowship. I earned it. The girls turned. They looked at her with the expression of people who had miscalculated. Not afraid, just recalibrating. We weren't talking to you, the taller one said. You were talking about me in a hallway where I was walking, Ava said pleasantly. That's talking to me. She met both their eyes. My hair is not too much. My hair is mine. And I'd appreciate you keeping your thoughts about it exactly where they started. Inside your head. She walked to her seminar. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the specific physical response to having to defend your existence in a space that should have simply been yours. She knew that shaking. She had felt it before. She breathed through it the way her mother had taught her. Slow, deep. The breath that says I am still here and I am still whole. She didn't know he had seen it. She didn't know he had been coming around the corridor corner at exactly the moment the exchange ended, and had stopped, and had watched her walk to her classroom with her chin up and her braids over her shoulder and her hands shaking at her sides. She didn't know what that had done to him. She found out at dinner. She was at her usual table by the window, hers now unofficially unchallenged since the first day, when the chair across from her scraped back. She looked up. Adrian Co sat down across from her. The cafeteria went so quiet so fast it was almost funny. He placed his tray on the table with the composure of a man who had made a decision and intended to live inside it without apology. He looked at her the way he'd been carefully not looking at her for 36 hours. Directly, fully, with all of that dark, quiet, unhurried attention. You can tell people to mind their business without explaining yourself, he said. She blinked. I'm sorry. What those girls said. His jaw was tight. Something was happening beneath his composure. She could see it the way you see something moving beneath the surface of water. You don't owe anyone an explanation of who you are or how you got here. She looked at him for a long moment. I know that, she said quietly. I know you know. He held her gaze. I just thought someone should say it. The cafeteria was still watching. She could feel it. Every eye in the room, the whispers multiplying. Jisoo somewhere across the room doing the math of what this meant and not liking the answer. She should have told him she was fine. She should have maintained the unbothered surface and not let him see that it had cost her something, standing in that hallway. Instead she said, thank you. 2 words. Simple. But they passed between them like something much larger. He nodded. He picked up his chopsticks. She picked up her fork. They ate dinner together for the first time. And the cafeteria, after a while, went back to its business, but not before everyone present understood, in the way that schools always understand these things without being told, that something had shifted in the social order of Haywin Academy. Something permanent. He walked her back toward the east wing after dinner. Not walking her home, they were going different directions. But the path from the cafeteria forked, and for approximately 4 minutes they walked the same corridor, and those 4 minutes had a quality she was still thinking about an hour later, standing in her dormitory room. Why sculpting? She'd asked. He'd been quiet for a moment. Because it starts as nothing and you have to find what's inside it, he said. The form already exists. You're just removing what doesn't belong. She had looked at him sideways. That's not what most people say about control. Something had flickered in his eyes. Most people are wrong about what control is. At the fork she had turned right, he had turned left, and that was all. No moment. No cinematic pause. But he had watched her go. And she had known. She was in the studio at 10 p.m. because of course this was hers now too, she had decided when he arrived at 10:15. He didn't say anything. He went to his workstation. She heard the sounds of him working. At some point the playlist she had on her phone shifted to something slower. An old song, one her mother used to play, and she felt it in her chest the way she always felt her mother's music, that sweet particular ache of love and grief occupying the same space. She didn't realize she'd stopped painting. She was just standing there, brush in hand, eyes on the canvas, feeling it. Ava. His voice, quiet, from closer than his workstation. She turned. He was standing a few feet away, and he was looking at her face with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Not the controlled composure, not the evaluating attention. Something entirely unguarded. Something almost alarmed. The specific alarm of a person who has just realized they care about something they didn't intend to care about. "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't ask." "You were about to." He held her gaze. "What is that song?" She exhaled softly. "My mother's song. She played it when she painted." She looked back at the canvas. "She passed 3 years ago. Music does this to me sometimes. I'm used to it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the studio, picked up a stool, placed it beside her and sat down, not touching her, not saying anything, just there, present. A warm, solid, deliberate presence at her side. She looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. He stayed. They sat in the studio for an hour side by side, not painting, not sculpting, not filling the silence. Just existing in it together, the way people exist in silence when they have found someone whose company they trust. At midnight she looked at him. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" "No," he said. "People will talk. People already talk." He looked at her. Something in his eyes had changed from that first morning in theory class. The bored, impenetrable composure now layered over with something warmer, something that had arrived without his permission and that he had, she could tell, stopped fighting somewhere around hour 36. Let them. Her heart did the thing again. She looked away before he could see it. The thing about a school the size of Haywin was that secrets didn't keep. By the next morning, every student in the academy knew that Adrian Seo had sat at the American Scholarship Girls' cafeteria table. Every student knew he had walked with her after dinner. And every student knew, with the particular social telepathy of teenagers who have been trained to read power dynamics from birth, that this meant something they had never seen from him before. Because Adrian Seo did not sit at people's tables. People sat at his. Jisoo found Ava between morning sessions. She was beautiful and composed, and she looked at Ava with the specific pain of someone who has been measuring themselves against an expectation for so long they've forgotten they're doing it. "Whatever you think is happening," Jisoo said quietly, "it isn't. His family has plans for him. His father has already—" She stopped. "I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the truth. You will get hurt." Ava looked at her. Not unkindly. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I mean that." Jisoo blinked, clearly prepared for a different response. "But what happens to me," Ava said gently, "is mine to figure out." She walked to her seminar. She thought about what Jisoo had said for the rest of the morning, not with fear, but with the careful honesty she owed herself. She thought about what she knew. A boy who noticed her coffee order, who found her notebook, who sat beside her in silence when she needed it most, who looked at her like she was the first thing in a long time that he hadn't been able to calculate. She thought about what she didn't know. What his family required of him, what world he came from, what it would cost him to choose something that wasn't already chosen for him. She was an artist. She had learned young that the most important thing was not to look away from the true shape of something just because its edges were complicated. She didn't look away. She found him at his workstation in the studio during the free period before lunch. He was working, or he had been working. When she came in, he set down his tools and watched her cross the studio with that full, complete attention, and she was beginning to understand that the attention, the full, undivided weight of it, was the most intimate thing about him. That he gave it to almost no one. That she was, apparently, an exception to a rule he had never examined before. She sat on her stool. She looked at his work. A form emerging from clay, angular and reaching unfinished. "Jisoo talked to me," she said. His expression went still. What did she say? That your family has plans. That I'll get hurt. She held his gaze. Is she wrong? A long silence. He looked at the sculpture, then at her. My father has expectations, he said carefully. He has had them since I was born. Who I become. Who I choose. He paused. He is not a gentle man. And what do you want? She asked. Not your father. You. He looked at her for a long moment. I have spent my entire life, he said slowly, like he was discovering the words as he said them, knowing exactly what I want and not allowing myself to want it. His eyes were very still. You are the first thing in a long time that I haven't been able to talk myself out of. Her breath caught. She held it, held his gaze, held the full, enormous weight of what he'd just given her. Adrian, she said softly, That's either the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me, or you are going to break my heart. I know. His voice was low. I'm asking you to let me try not to. It happened in the auditorium, during the monthly assembly, in front of every student and faculty member at Heir'S Academy. She didn't plan it. None of it was planned. The assembly was routine: student announcements, upcoming events, academic recognitions. She was sitting in the scholarship student section near the back when the headmaster recognized the year's fellowship recipients, and her name was called, and she stood, and 250 people looked at her. Most of the looks were fine. One was not. From the legacy section, loud enough to carry, clearly intended to carry. She only got it because they needed diversity. The voice belonged to one of the girls from the hallway. She said it with the confidence of someone who has never faced a consequence for this specific kind of cruelty. The auditorium went very still. Ava stood in the silence. She was not going to cry. She was not going to flinch. She was not going to give this school, this room, or that girl the satisfaction of watching her diminish. But it landed. It always landed. No matter how many times you built the armor, this specific thing, the suggestion that your achievement was not yours, that your presence was a correction rather than a choice, found the gap every time. She kept her face still. Then she heard the scrape of a chair from the front section. She watched Adrian Co stand up. He didn't look at her. He looked at the room, slowly, deliberately, with the specific quality of stillness that preceded everything he did that mattered. And then, in the total silence of the auditorium, in front of every person at Heir'S Academy, he spoke. Ava Brooks placed first in a selection process that reviewed 400 candidates from 30 countries. His voice was calm and precise and filled the room without effort. She was selected on the merit of her work by a panel of 12 judges who did not know her name when they scored her portfolio. He paused. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either misinformed or dishonest. Either way, they're wrong. He sat back down. The auditorium was silent for 4 full seconds. Then the headmaster cleared his throat and continued the assembly as though the ground had not just fundamentally shifted. Ava sat down. Her hands were shaking again, but differently this time. Not from the effort of holding herself together. From something else entirely. Something that felt, dangerously, like the first moment of something she was no longer sure she wanted to stop. She stared at the back of his head for the rest of the assembly. After it ended, when students filed into the corridor and the noise of 250 people returning to their lives filled the building, she found him. She touched his arm. He turned. She looked up at him in the crowded corridor with students flowing past them on both sides, and she didn't care about any of them. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He looked at her. Something in his face was open in the way it had been in the studio, that unguarded, undefended quality that she understood was rare and significant and chosen. "Because you deserve to have someone say it out loud," he said. "In a room full of people." Her throat was tight. "You keep doing that," she said. "Saying the thing that I didn't know I needed to hear." "I know." His voice was low. "I'm trying to learn what you need. I want to learn what you need." The corridor was loud and crowded, and they were standing in the middle of it, and none of it existed. "Adrian." Her voice was very quiet. "If you're doing this, if this is real, then I need you to know something. Tell me. I am not someone you can decide about halfway. I'm not someone you give attention to until your family reminds you of their plans and then take it back." She held his gaze. "If you're in, you're in. And if you're not ready for that, I need you to tell me now before." She stopped. "Before what?" he said softly. "Before it's too late," she didn't say. He took a breath. And then Adrian Co, the boy who controlled every variable, who never moved without calculating, who had spent his entire life knowing what he wanted and refusing to want it, made the most uncontrolled, uncalculated, undefended decision of his life. He reached out. Slowly. He tucked a single braid behind her shoulder, his fingertips barely grazing her collarbone. A gesture so gentle it was almost not a gesture at all. "I told my father this morning," he said quietly, "that there are some things he planned for that I will not be doing." Her eyes widened. "He was not pleased," Adrian continued, with the ghost of something in his voice that was almost humor and was definitely courage. "He is rarely pleased with me when I'm being honest. I've decided I can live with that." She stared at him. "What did you tell him?" she asked. He met her eyes. That I met someone who holds her brush too tight and paints things she doesn't understand until they're finished. A pause. And that I intend to figure out what that means. The first tear surprised her. She didn't plan it and she couldn't stop it. It came from somewhere below her prepared self, below the armor, from the place where she was simply Ava, 22 years old, 9,000 miles from home, missing her mother, carrying her grandmother's prayers, and completely unprepared to be standing in a crowded hallway feeling this scene by a person she had known for 72 hours. She pressed her lips together. He looked at the tear on her face with the expression of someone who has just watched something precious and irreplaceable fracture in his hands. I'm sorry, he started. Don't you dare apologize, she said. Her voice was unsteady and she didn't care. These are good tears. I have bad tears and good tears and these are... She exhaled a small broken laugh. These are really good tears. Something collapsed in his face. Not broke, opened, like a window thrown wide. He looked at her the way people look at things they have decided to keep. Come to the studio tonight, he said quietly. I want to show you what I've been working on. She wiped her eye with the back of her hand and nodded. That night, the sculpture was of hands. Two of them, not touching, but reaching toward each other across a space that was almost closed. The fingers were detailed and careful, each one specific, each one indicating a person rather than a symbol. One set longer, broader. One set smaller, the nails slightly longer. A ring on the third finger that was just a detail, just an impulse, just something he'd added without deciding to. She stood in front of it for a long time. When did you start this? She asked. Monday morning, he said. Monday. The day she arrived. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Adrian. I know. His voice was quiet behind her. I know it's too much. I know it's not too much. She turned to face him. Her eyes were full again and she let them be full because she was done performing otherwise with this person. It's the most, nobody has ever. She stopped. Tried again. My mother used to say that an artist shows you who they are in what they make before they know how to say it. She was right, he said. She was always right. A breath. She would have liked you. He was very still. She would have made you eat too much and interrogated you for 3 hours. Ava continued, her voice soft. And at the end of it she would have taken me aside and said, baby, that boy is scared of himself but he's not scared of you and that's the important part. His throat moved. Was she right about that too? Ava asked. He crossed the studio in 3 steps and stood in front of her. Close enough that she had to tilt her head to hold his gaze. And he looked at her with 72 hours of everything. The coffee, the notebook, the cafeteria, the hallway, the auditorium, the studio at midnight with her mother's music playing. All of it present in his eyes at once. Yes, he said. She was right about that too. She reached up and put her hand against his face. His eyes closed. Like someone receiving something they had been waiting a very long time for without knowing they were waiting. When he opened them, they were very bright. Hi, she said softly. Hi, he said. And the studio was quiet, and Seoul was enormous outside the windows. And the sculpture of 2 hands reaching across a closing space stood on the work table behind them, nearly finished. Nearly. 3 months later. The piece sold first at the student exhibition. Not hers. The sculpture, 72 Hours, he had titled it simply, was purchased before the exhibition formally opened by a collector who saw it during setup and offered a number that made the faculty advisor's eyes widen. Adrian turned it down. It's not for sale, he told the collector. Later, when Ava stood in front of it in the exhibition hall with the catalog in her hand and read the small card beside it. Not for sale. Personal collection. She felt the warmth of it move through her from her chest outward. She took a photo and sent it to her grandmother. Grandma May called in 40 seconds. Baby. The laugh in her voice was the specific laugh she reserved for things she had known were coming before anyone else did. Tell me about this boy. He's complicated, Ava said. All the good ones are. She looked across the exhibition hall, where Adrian was standing with his hands in his pockets looking at her painting. The 2 figures, the warm space between them, the rising woman. With the same attention he gave everything he decided mattered. He's learning to be soft, Grandma. And it's the bravest thing I've ever watched anyone do. A pause. The sound of Grandma May's kitchen. Something good on the stove. And you? Her grandmother said. What are you learning? Ava watched him look at her painting. She thought about 72 hours. About a wrong room and a right moment. About a coffee she didn't order and a notebook returned across a courtyard. About a studio at midnight and a boy sitting beside her in the silence because she needed him too and he knew it before she said it. She thought about her mother's brushes in their case. About the gospel music playing low in a kitchen in Atlanta. About a woman who had worked double shifts and painted at 2 a.m. and believed, all the way to the end, that her daughter was going somewhere magnificent. She thought about how grief and love occupy the same space, and how sometimes the love arrives with a face you didn't expect and a presence that feels, impossibly and immediately, like home. I'm learning, Ava said softly, that getting lost in the right hallway is not the same thing as being lost. Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then, your mama is so proud of you, baby. Ava smiled. Let the tears come. Let them be good. Across the hall, Adrian looked up from her painting and found her face, the way he always found her face, like it was the thing his attention was always moving toward, and something in his expression said, there you are, the way it said it every time, the way she was starting to believe it would keep saying it for a very long time. She raised her hand. He raised his, and in the warm, lit hall and soul, surrounded by the things they had made, they found each other across the distance, just like in the sculpture, reaching, almost touching, then finally, fully, completely, together. If the story found you somewhere real, if it touched something you didn't expect, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to feel something good today. Tell me in the comments, what moment got you? Because I wrote every single one of them for you. Subscribe, because Ava and Adrian's story is just beginning, and so is ours.